Hi everyone, Marina Kukla here again to talk about cognitive behavioral therapy for work success, CBTw session 3, and some key things to think about when facilitating this in a group setting. So session 1, we had our introduction to group and to this intervention and sort of what this is all about. We also start to lay the foundation of veterans' goals for being in this group and relatedly veterans' goals for work. And then importantly, we have them go through their narratives so they can start thinking about themselves and work and start to build up that sense of self as a worker or in a career. Session 2, we add on to that. We introduce the CBT core elements and we define those elements. Then we take people through that positive or negative process and pathway where our thoughts are what makes the difference. So when we have more healthier thinking, that can lead to feeling better and better behavioral outcomes and just better decisions for ourselves. Now in session 3, we're going to build on that base that we're forming again, and we're going to talk about thinking about work specifically. So our agenda for this week is to identify those unhealthy, unhelpful, and inaccurate thoughts about work. So here we're going to introduce people to one of our core frameworks of CBTw, which is not just thoughts as positive or negative, but thoughts as helpful or unhelpful, healthy or unhealthy, and of course, accurate or inaccurate. Then we're going to go through our common mistakes in thinking that we all make. And then finally, we're going to take them through a set of didactic exercises to practice using some of this. So of course, in session 3, just like in our previous sessions, we're going to go through the core introductory elements, the first of which is the work check-in. As a reminder, it's helpful to have every single veteran in the group check in, and you can just leave it at that. Who wants to check in this week, and then you can start with that person and then kind of go around. The expectation is that everybody says something, even if their check-in is just nothing new this week or haven't done anything about work. Some people have other check-ins. They may have other things going on in their life, like they could say, got a new apartment or had something else important that they wanted to share with the group. But we always want to make sure that we're letting them check in about work and that we're prompting every single person to do that. Then we go through our homework check-in from last week. So the homework from last week was to check in with yourself, noticing when you have negative feelings about work, and place that scenario into the CBT model. So we would just ask people to share their homework. If no one shared, or if they said, well, yeah, I did it, but they don't have much they want to share with the group, you can go to a process-based question. I usually do that second though. And first I try to ask about the content of the homework, what they did, how it was. And then if there are no kind of more discussions, sometimes I'll ask, was it easy or was it hard? What was it like actually trying it in your life? And what did you think? So once you've gone through the homework, usually we give everybody an opportunity to talk about their homework. And then realistically, it's usually a couple people who actually go through and do that. Sometimes it's more, and that's great, but usually it's a couple people. But we leave it open-ended so that if other people want to jump in and share their homework or how it was for them, for their take home, they can do that. And then our third introductory element, of course, is reviewing the agenda, which I just did here, which is these 3 check marks on page 22. Then we have a question to think about and discuss. So, which is, can you recall an experience when you were thinking about a situation and thoughts got in the way of what you were trying to do or what you were trying to accomplish? So this is just another way to emphasize that our thoughts can influence what we do and how we feel. And in this case, specifically what we do. So here are some thoughts in a situation. I'll never be able to stick with the job. This job is too much of a hassle. I can't handle it mentally. I have a felony. No one will want to hire me. I haven't worked in a really long time. Who knows if I'll be able to do it? I might fail again. I'm getting older. I doubt anyone will want to hire me. So what's the point in even trying? I have too many physical limitations to work. All of these examples came from veterans in past CBTW groups, and so we included them here They're so relevant and so commonly experienced by the folks that we work with. So then we have a little education here on page 24. What thoughts have you had in which you criticize yourself about work or about the process of finding a job? And we take veterans through this section, which kind of goes through and defines and reviews automatic thinking and how the automatic thoughts work. And so what might be helpful is to have a veteran in the group want to read this. And so you can just leave it open-ended to the group. Or if you know somebody particularly likes to read, you could ask them to read it. And then we have yet another little piece of education here on the top of 25. So sometimes when we're tired or stressed or suffering from mental illness, those negative, unhelpful, unhealthy, inaccurate thoughts start to get louder and creep in more. And so we end up with this distorted picture of the world that might not really jive with reality. And so then we have more examples of both these healthy and unhealthy thoughts. So I like my coworkers. I did a good job at work. I fail at everything I try. I'll never be able to make it in a civilian job. These are just examples of automatic thoughts that go through our head at different times. The reason that we put these here is to show veterans what this automatic thoughts really means. So it's any sort of thoughts that might go through our head. I'm hungry, I want to have a turkey sandwich for lunch. That could be an automatic thought. But we're more interested in those thoughts which affect our well-being and how we think and feel and what we end up doing. And specifically for this group, as it relates to work. And then now on 26, we finally get to our typology of how to consider thoughts as helpful or unhelpful, healthy or unhealthy, and accurate or inaccurate. So helpful or unhelpful, one way to think about this is this thought helping or harming us? If our goal is to get a job and someone thinks to themselves, I'm worthless, I'm just going to fail again, so why even show up to this interview? Then we can say that that's an unhelpful thought and probably an unhealthy one too. So healthy and unhealthy, especially as it relates to how we think and feel about ourselves as people, that can help us answer that question. I'm a loser, I don't do anything right, I'm always messing up. Those are obviously unhealthy thoughts. So, and then lastly, are these thoughts really true? Are they based in reality? Are they accurate? Are we making a mistake in thinking? So we're jumping ahead because we haven't really introduced mistakes in thinking yet. That's the next section in session 3, but we're still going to kind of go through this. And then we have examples. And so this is where it's good to elicit an example from someone in group. If no one has an example they want to share, usually I'll say, does anybody have a scenario or a situation related to work that they want to share, or a thought that maybe you've had? The other thing that you could do to start this off is to come up with your own thought that's very common, and then you can go through it, and then veterans can together as a group say, is this helpful or unhelpful? And the group will kind of chime in and then go through each of these. Is this healthy or unhealthy? Then maybe once you've gone through your own example that's concrete and easy to understand, then you can elicit an example from the group if you'd like. And then what I would like people to do is take 5 minutes or however many minutes you have and actually sit down in their manuals and write. So this would be a quiet period, like I said, of just a few minutes where veterans would actually write at least one example or two, but everyone should write something down where they can come up with their own and then figure out this. The key here is that veterans aren't always going to agree with each other or with you that thoughts are always unhelpful, unhealthy, and inaccurate. And sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's a very mixed picture. And a lot of times what people will say is when they have these super self-critical thoughts, like, I never do anything right, or I'm messing up, that motivates behavior. I don't think it does, but a lot of people do view it that way. So they'll say, well, it's helpful because it makes me do better next time or not make that same mistake. But then you would ask, okay, but is that healthy or unhealthy to say to yourself, I'm always messing up, or to be super self-critical or beating yourself up? And most people would say, yeah, beating myself up and saying those really super unhealthy things is is not helping me out. So they'll say, yes, that's unhealthy. And accurate or inaccurate, that's another one that sometimes people will say, well, I have lost every job I've had, so of course I'm going to fail again. That's accurate. That's based on history, or that's based on what I've gone through before. And so it's key that as facilitators, we don't want to argue with people or say, I know what's right, this is inaccurate. And so sometimes we have to agree to disagree. But what we can agree on is that something here is off, right? Maybe it's just one of these. Maybe the thought is unhelpful if your goal is to get a job, or maybe it's unhealthy because it's really critical and it hurts your self-esteem or just makes you feel bad, or you're beating yourself up. You're that little guy on your shoulder who's actually the one who's hardest on yourself, not anyone else. So we don't have to agree that all of these things are off, but maybe there's just one or two of them that is off. And that's why this is a thought that in the future, when we talk next week and we introduce the 4As, that's when we want to answer that thought and change it to something better. So if we come back here, now we've gone through, veterans have had 5 minutes or so to sit and write. Now you would come together as a group and say, would anyone like to share theirs with the group? And again, they would share their thought. They might share something that's not a thought, because we're just working on thoughts. People might identify something completely unrelated. They might identify an emotion or an action, a behavior, or something else, and be completely off base. And that's okay. This is where we can start using our primary technique in CBTW a little bit more than what we used it in session 1 and 2, which is reflecting thoughts. So if somebody tells you a scenario like, I was working at Wendy's and I've had that job for a couple months, and last month, my supervisor kind of got on me, got in my face, and I wasn't going to take that disrespect, so I walked off. They say that's the scenario, and they'll say, well, that was healthy because I'm not going to be talked to like that. And I lost my job, so I don't know if that's helpful or not. I need a job, but I do know I'm not going to be disrespected. So they could just share with the group that in this situation. So what you could do as a facilitator, then, you've heard a lot of things, a whole narrative, a whole story about what happened at Wendy's and with the supervisor in particular. So you could choose one thought there, which is, I'm not going to be disrespected. That's a thought. That's the most explicit thought in this narrative or in this story. Another thought would be, at that moment with the supervisor, when you're about to walk off, there could be lots of other thoughts that occurred right at that moment, those automatic thoughts. It could be, I don't need this job. I'm too good for this job. I'm going to show these people, or a million other things, or I hate this, or I'm going to go find something better. And then you could look at that thought and ask these 3 questions again. So, but if the thought is, I'm not going to be disrespected like that, the person might say, well, that's accurate. That's how I feel. Okay, so that one doesn't apply as much. But you could argue whether that's a helpful thought if you need to keep a job to pay your rent or to put food on the table, whatever it is. So you can see how a veteran could come out with something that maybe seems like it's not directly related to this exercise, but it's about work, or perhaps it's even about something unrelated to work. But as facilitators, we can start using our primary strategy technique of reflecting thoughts. I've pulled up the facilitator guide, this is actually the beginning of it, which is the cheat sheet portion, where we have number 7, focus on listening for and reflecting thoughts about work. Remember here in red to use your thinking words and use that first person as much as you can. So like I just said, I'm not going to be respected like that. You could say that exactly back to the person, and you've made it really explicit. You've said it in their words. Or you could say, you're thinking to yourself, I'm not going to be respected that way. That would be a way to use a thinking word, which I didn't directly do. But here are some examples of our thinking words. There are many others. These are just the ones that kind of off the top of my head. You're wondering, you're thinking, you've decided. So it sounds like you want to get a job, but you're thinking you're too old. You've noticed. You're saying to yourself, I'm not going to be disrespected like that. What I hear you saying is you've had trouble keeping jobs. You're saying to yourself, I don't want to fail, so why put myself back out there? I like using that first person a lot, and you can directly reflect back what they've just said. Um, so so continue to do that. You don't have to reflect everything or solve the issue, like with the Wendy's or with the obviously the interpersonal issues that took place with the supervisor. You don't have to solve that today. You also don't have to respond to the whole thing, the whole narrative, but you can just pick out one piece of it and reflect that back. And if it relates to this exercise, great. And if it doesn't, that's okay too. You don't have to tie everything back to the material. If you can, that's wonderful, but you don't have to feel like you have to fit everything, um, that square block into that round hole. You don't have to do that every time. But continue to reflect those thoughts. Keep it basic. We're still only at session 3. We're not answering thoughts yet. We're just working on starting to be aware and identify those now automatic thoughts, which we've labeled and given a name. Keep it very, very basic though. Okay, so now we're to our next section, which is mistakes in thinking. This is also another one where I really like to have veterans in the group read these, and you can alternate or have veterans read a couple or however much you want to do it. However you want to do it, go for it. So we have either or thinking, we have jumping to conclusions. Underneath the boxes, you'll see there's like a small example here. I usually like to go through those as a group, and people will also say, oh, that's me, I jump to conclusions, or I blow things out of proportions and I magnify stuff. So these examples really help people make concrete what these mistakes in thinking are. They demonstrate and show them how this works and what these are. You can also ask people, if no one's responding during this, is this you? Can you relate to this? Does anybody have other examples of these? To the extent that you have time within the hour or within your group, allotted group time. People usually like to go through this, and this is one where people usually participate quite a bit. So you would expect some participation, and if you're not getting that, that's where you would take a stop, read one, stop, go through the example maybe, and then ask people for that feedback if they can relate. Usually people have many, including us. This would be another one where if you feel like this is a place for appropriate self-disclosure, that you could use it and say, oh, this is me, or I'm a perfectionist, or whatever it is, to kind of grease the wheels, and veterans will start to share. But the idea is that they would start to understand that these mistakes in thinking can really distort how we see the world and ourselves, and that these things, we feel like these things are accurate. Like, if I don't get this job, it's the end of the world. I have to quit looking. It's over. This failure is too much to bear. And so that would be several of these perhaps, but that would be magnifying, blowing one thing out of proportion. But you can see how the idea is showing people how their thoughts can really distort how we see the world and then what we go ahead and do. And that these types of thoughts that fit within these buckets of mistakes in thinking or cognitive distortions, this is the kind of thinking that we want to start to focus on in CBTW, so we can be more aware of it and then assess and answer it and then act upon that healthier thinking, which is next week, which is session 4. We're not there yet. We don't want to use that language with people and jump ahead of ourselves. So we want to stay within the bounds of session 3. So here we have, what are your most common mistakes in thinking? So they could jot down some notes there. And then importantly, the take home for session 3 then is to identify some thoughts and characterize them within this typology of healthy, helpful, and accurate, inaccurate. So another thing is that once we write down our common mistakes in thinking here, sometimes we also adjust the homework a little bit and say, if you notice you're doing those mistakes in thinking, if you're a perfectionist, if you're someone who tends to jump to conclusions, or magnify, or whatever it is, notice those things and jot those things down, and then look at them here if you can. So those are our main content things for session 3. Our main technique as facilitators is starting to use those basic reflections and basic feedback which you're using in sessions 1 and 2. Now we're building and we're using more of that cognitive reflection as you can. With a big group, you may not have as much opportunity to do reflection. You certainly probably can't do it with every person, but as you have little opportunities here and there, take those opportunities. Don't feel pressured if you find that the group is giving each other a lot of feedback. That's good. That's building good group collaboration. But if that leaves less time for you to provide that reflection or feedback, that's okay. Do what you can do. With a smaller group, it's probably a little bit more feasible to do this more often, but it depends on a lot of those group dynamics. You want to respond to what people are giving you during group, and then you just go from there and kind of do the best you can, as you would in any other, facilitating any other group. But these are the main things to kind of think about. We're still really working on building rapport with people. This is still only the 3rd session. And so hopefully we've had the majority of the group or everyone who's come in the first 2 sessions at some point. And so they're at least aware of the group. But here we're still building rapport. We're trying to build that group cohesiveness with one another, not just with us. And so that's another main goal here, is to continue to do that. For veterans who you've identified who may be at risk for mixed engagement or a disengagement in the future, continue to work on building rapport with them in particular. If you know, as you have an opportunity to do that, those are things that I think are still very important at this early stage of the intervention. So these are some things to think about. Thanks again for watching this, and I will be back next week for session 4.